No. Excellent. Okay, the first item on the agenda, second item actually, is approval of minutes of February 28, 2017. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All right, any discussion of the minutes, changes, modifications, updates? Anyone? Nope. Nope. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We're moving along at breakneck speed. The third item on the agenda is the Central Avenue presentation, and for that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Kruger. Can everybody hear me in the back? Okay. There's plenty of seating up here, too. So, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming, and thank you to those who participated in the survey that we had online, as well as the first open house in fall. I think this is a really, really exciting project for the village, and there's so much opportunity to modernize it, make it safer, more beautiful, more functional. So it's a really great project for the village, and I personally and the engineering staff are really excited about it. Some of you may know we received a large federal grant for this project, about $3.5 million, and that's roughly 70% of the total cost. So the federal government will pay for 70% of the design and the construction cost. All federal projects have a three-phase process, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We're just in the middle of phase 1, which is the feasibility study. It's really the time where we develop the design concepts. And then at the end of the phase 1 study, which will be about the end of the year, we have to submit a report to IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation, in Springfield, and they'll take a look and review and approve the concepts that we've prepared for the project. From there, we go into the actual design phase, where we put pen to paper and build the plans and specifications that we go out to bid, and that'll take about a year. That'll happen in 2018. And then if all goes well in 2019, we'll go out for bid and actually build the project. So there's a few things that I just want to point out. The federal government requires standards when we build a road. So things that we're going to show you tonight, parking lanes, travel lanes, bike lanes have standard widths that the federal government will require. So the options that you'll see tonight are based on those requirements. There's also not an endless amount of money that we can spend on this project, unfortunately. We are capped at the $3.5 million. Anything above that would be local cost. So we're going to talk about a lot of cool options with traffic calming and green infrastructure, streetscape. We just have to be a little conscious at this point in the early on in the project, we don't have a very strong concept of cost, and so we want to get as many ideas as possible and have a good direction, but at some point we'll have to develop those cost estimates and make sure we're within our budget. So I'm also excited to say this is very much like Sheridan Road. I think Sheridan Road turned out beautifully, and it's the same funding source, the same process, and we have the same consultant who did the design for Sheridan Road is working on our phase 1 study for Central Avenue. So with that, I turn the presentation over to Brian Fairwood of Trans Systems. He's going to go through. It's a bit of a lengthy PowerPoint, so we ask your patience. There's 3 decision points that we really want to focus on. Those are the back-end angled parking, concept of using green infrastructure, and then the final and probably most important point is what's the roadway geometry? Will it have just travel lanes and parking lanes, bike lanes, shared lanes? There's 3 options that we're going to talk about.
Well, good evening. We're honored to be here tonight to present you an update on the Central Avenue Reconstruction project. The agenda is as follows. We're going to walk through the background and overall process as described, along with give you a run through of the existing conditions. We'll talk about the different options that we've looked at and some of the recommendations that we're making, along with those decision points that we're looking for tonight. And we'll provide an opportunity for both committee and public comment. So the process, as Bridget described, is laid out in 3 phases. $3.5 million in federal funding has been secured. We're currently in our phase 1 process. Look to complete that this year, moving into phase 2 next year, phase 3 in 2019. So let's get out there in the corridor and look at the existing conditions. The limits of the project are from Green Bay Road to Sheridan Road. And we'll start here on the west end of the project in the downtown area. And what's important to note as we progress along the corridor is the varying width of the roadway that we have to work with. So in the downtown area, you see here a pretty wide pavement section, but that includes parking on the north side in a parallel configuration, and then on the south side in an angle or diagonal configuration that you see in the photo. Now as we head east, looking at the section between 11th and 8th, you start to get a sense of that residential character, where you start to see the tree canopy, the roadway begins to narrow. We're down to 38 feet within this section. There is parking, albeit parallel, on both sides of the roadway, and off to the left you can see the Central Elementary School. Continuing further to the east, in the segment between 8th and 4th, you really see the nature of the character of the neighborhood with the tree canopied. The street continues to narrow down. We're at 34 feet within this section. Parking is still allowed on both sides of the street in a parallel condition. And then the final segment from 4th to Sheridan really narrows down 28 feet in width from a pavement perspective, and parking in this section is currently restricted on the north side of the road. On the south side, parallel parking is allowed. So as part of this project, the following are going to be part of the overall improvements. We're going to have roadway construction, which will include new pavement, curbs, and sidewalk ramps. We'll have new and upgraded traffic signals at Central and Wilmette. And as part of this project, we'll also look at water main upgrades, sewer upgrades, as funding is available. There are also other opportunities that we'll look at as part of the improvements, including complete streets initiatives, which will involve enhancements for both bike and pedestrian accommodations, additional safety improvements, incorporating green infrastructure, and of course, looking for ways to improve aesthetics throughout the corridor. As important it is to talk about what we're going to do as part of this project, it's also important to talk about what we're not going to be doing as part of this project. There will not be roadway widening done as part of this project. So as we talked about the different segments that we have throughout the corridor, we're not going to be widening the roadway. We're going to replace in kind, keeping the same footprint. There will not be residential diagonal parking. We're not adding diagonal parking in the residential section like we have in the downtown. The width is not available for that. We won't have tree removals as part of this project. We're not looking to incorporate an exclusive or special bus lane, and we do not have any loss of property or right-of-way acquisition that will be incurred as part of the improvements. The overall goal of this project is to maintain the character of Central Avenue. It's a great corridor. We want to maintain that and find ways to enhance it. So the goal of our Phase 1 preliminary engineering is to develop that consensus-driven preferred alternative. And so to help us get there, we look at the project from a number of different factors, and these icons represent those factors. From left to right, we have environmental, traffic, drainage, safety, aesthetics, parking, and bike accommodations. And we're going to walk through a quick analysis on some of these factors here to you tonight, which helps shape the various options that we will be presenting later on. Essentially, there's 4 steps to this preliminary engineering process: data collection, project goals, developing alternatives, and screening those alternatives to develop that final preferred alternative. As part of public meeting number 1, which took place back in November, we presented to you our data collection and established those project goals. And here tonight, we're presenting to you the alternatives or options that we developed and the process that we're going through to help screen those down. All with the purpose of getting to that preferred alternative. And we're also looking for direction on 3 major or main decision points this evening. So to go back and review public meeting number 1, which was back in November, the purpose there was to gather input to help shape that new vision for Central Avenue. We had nearly 70 attendees at that meeting. We received over 200 comments. We also had a survey that was provided online, and we had over 100 surveys completed as part of that. And so this is what we heard from that first public meeting as it was related to those comments and that survey. Repair the roadway and keep the character, whether that's the trees, the residential feel, or even the downtown, and making sure we find ways to enhance those opportunities we see in the downtown. Minimizing construction impacts, that's important for both the downtown, the school, and of course, the adjacent residents. And then we heard a lot of varying opinions related to parking and biking, and we're going to walk through those with you tonight. So now I'm going to describe to you some of the responses that we received on some of these questions in our survey as it relates to some of these topics that influenced the options we're presenting tonight. So as it relates to downtown parking, question number 4 in our survey was, on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is low and 5 is high, how do you value the on-street downtown district parking? About 70% of all respondents value that parking within the downtown. It's extremely important, not only for the businesses, but for the customers that patronize those businesses. Some additional comments that we heard about downtown parking was to find ways to promote the public lots even more than they already are. And we also heard some interest in providing back-end parking. And at our first meeting, we presented this as an option or something to think about. Some of the advantages of back-end parking you see listed here. From a safety perspective, collisions tend to be less severe, and repairs due to collisions are less costly. It does provide improved visibility for both cars and bikes. It's safer to drive out of those spots than to back out. Passengers can exit to the sidewalk instead of within the roadway with moving traffic. And cyclists, as you see here in the photo, feel safer when they can make that eye contact with vehicles as they're looking to pull out or as the bikes are passing those cars. The graphic to the right just represents how that maneuver would take place. Some of the negatives with this configuration are as follows. The business owners tend to feel that it discourages customers. It's more difficult to back into those spaces than to just being able to pull in directly. It may result in more attempts to back into those spots, which could be blocking the through traffic, which could add to congestion. There's a concern of backing into the sidewalk or onto the sidewalk, and in this area where you have a number of dining options and restaurants and cafes and tables, that would be a concern. And then the exhaust that those vehicles bring to that environment is something that is problematic. And the last point to make is that while we are showing a bike lane in this representative photo, we would not be able to incorporate it in this location because of the width that we have to work with. As we mentioned, we're not going to be looking to change the curb width in any of the sections. We need that width for the sidewalk space, particularly in the downtown with the adjacent businesses. So there wouldn't be that opportunity to have a bike lane within the downtown section of Central. So this is our decision point number 1. To have, or the question is, do we incorporate back-end parking as part of our improvement, or do we maintain the traditional pull-in parking?
It's your call. I wasn't sure. That's what I'm writing down.
Yeah. I mean, any more on this?
No.
You've set this decision point up well.
Right.
I think maybe we should stop and, talk about it. Should we do public comment on back-end parking as well? Is there anybody that wants to actually speak for or against back-end parking? So there's a couple people kind of get in a queue here and
And I have a quick question, too. There was the demonstration of back-in parking at Going Green Matters. How was that received? What did people think of it? How did that work out? Any ideas?
I don't know. Was that down in the parking lot?
It was at the parking lot at Gilson. I didn't get down there.
Please, come on up, just get in a line here, and if you could identify yourself and where you live, and that's it. Just
Can I just ask one question? Just, Brian, clarify your statement. The back-end parking, how did that get in? Was that something you recommended, or was it? It was expressed by the residents?
Yes.
Right.
It was a comment that we took in. It's not a recommendation.
Got it.
It's an opportunity to change the parking configuration if
Okay.
that's something that
Yep.
village desires.
No.
So I think the way this will work is we'll hear from the residents, then we'll kind of close public comment on that. We will talk about it and come to a decision on it, and we'll have the opportunity to ask questions or speak amongst yourselves. So that's kind of maybe the way we'll handle all three of these decision points today. So if the next decision point is something you want to speak about, you'll be able to speak about it as well, but please speak about back-in parking for or against, or any thoughts on it.
Okay. I'm Julie Usum. I'm the Executive Director of the Wilmette Kenilworth Chamber of Commerce. And we are opposed to the back-end parking. The businesses feel very strong. They agree pretty strongly with the negatives that are listed here. And I think that overall, the businesses don't think it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Susan Barton. Do I have to state address?
Yeah, please.
618 Fifth Street in Wilmette. And I am for back-end parking in our downtown area and trying to figure out a way to put a bike lane coming from east to west. We have two really great north to south options. The Green Bay Trail is great. Sheridan Road is fantastic for biking. But I am on the village-wide Civics and Safety Committee. I've been a co-chair for a number of years. And we actually train children how to ride their bikes from Central School to Highcrest Middle School and to the Wilmette Junior High. So from Central, this downtown area is very tricky. So what do we do with them? They can't ride on the sidewalk. So do you want them to ride on the road with people backing up into, where they're biking? These are children. So we've actually trained, we took the bike map that is currently used by the Wilmette Village and tweaked it because we don't want them to ride over on Wilmette Avenue. There's like a hump. So if you look at that map, there's in the way it's recommended for the bike path to run, it should go over Greenleaf and then continue down into Wilmette Avenue. And the visibility is really bad for children, and the train is there. So we've actually kind of tweaked that. And as we bring children from fourth grade with groups of parents to ride to Highcrest as a test ride to teach them how to go, this is a problem. The downtown area is a problem. So actually we've brought them over to Greenleaf and then hooked them in behind the village hall here to get on that little bike lane that goes this way.
Yeah, the bike to Green Bay Trail.
To then cross over on Central, which is not in accordance to the map that the village has stated. But it's fine. I feel it's safer. The visibility is better. And I lived in Asia. Everyone rear ends. Everyone does this. Everyone parks like this in Asia. And it's actually safer because as the driver gets into the car, they can see what's happening in front of them instead of backing up into it. So as a cyclist who has been hit by a car 3 times, I'm trying to minimize accidents. And, I want children in this village to be safe. And I think we need to think about how, as Central Avenue, this project is really exciting, and I think it's great. I'm super excited about it. And this is our time to really think about how do we link this great project of Central Avenue resurfacing and active transportation and Open Streets Initiative. How do we link it all together? And we think about like the Park District. They run great programs for children who are independent on their bikes, and they're going from, the rec center to the beach, and we have no real way to send them that's safe. We've got great north-south options, but no east-west. And I think that kind of came up in our bike study that we did earlier as well, and I was part of that commission as well. I'm also on the Transportation Commission, so anyway, it's near and dear to my heart. So I hope we find something that works. I know we're limited in our diameter and parameter, and we can't change structure of streets and engineering. But we need to think about, the 11-year-old or the 13-year-old who's on his bike and he wants to go from playing pirate tennis to the beach to do his aquatics camp in our park district, and how we do that. So, this, I think, is important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hi there.
My name is Ann Nagel. I live at 1139 Manor. I'm a board member with Go Green Wilmette, and also I represent Wilmette Citizens for Active Transportation. Back in October, our partners, Trans Systems, participated with a walk audit that was conducted by Mark Fenton, a national transportation expert. And I think they collaborated and agreed that back and angled parking is a very good idea in terms of safety for not only drivers, but bicyclists and families with children who are unloading their children in the downtown area. So I think it is a good idea. Back just a month ago at Going Green Matters, we, Wilmette Citizens for Active Transportation, demonstrated back and angled parking to 1,000 attendees with a diorama, which I'd be happy to show you if you weren't able to attend. And down at the beach, we had a pop-up back and angled demonstration where people could try it. I manned that. About 25 people came down. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but people enjoyed it and said they enjoyed trying it. And many people told me, this is the only way I will pull into a parking space. I bet half of those people said that. So there is some learning to it, but I would suggest maybe as a village we could have another pop-up where it was open to the public to try it. It's a good way to garner feedback more than, I don't think it'll work. You can try it and bring it on. So that would be my suggestion, and thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening. I'm Chuck Ryder, 830 Central in Wilmette, and I'm in favor of this for a couple of reasons. One, they do this in Austin, Texas on Congress Street, which, if you've been to Austin, is a much busier street than this. A completely commercial street with outdoor dining, and it works well. Congress is a much higher speed street than this with much more congestion, and I think it's a good solution. Second is, we live across from Central School, and if you want to see the dangers of backing out into traffic, you need only watch the people who park diagonally on 9th Street, who regularly bump into parked cars and have sort of horn-blowing things with people coming down 9th Street to the south. Third is, if you ride your bike, which we do a great deal, we avoid going through downtown Wilmette because of this problem. If you ride up north through Highland Park, and there's a whole zone of pull-in diagonal parking, it is terrifying. People back up without having any idea that they're
They can't hear you in the back.
I'm sorry.
It's a curse of being really tall.
I'll put the microphone up a little higher in that case. No, I think that if you're a bicyclist, the nose-in parking is terrifying because people back up and they don't see you and they don't look. And so this back-end parking, I think, is much safer for cyclists, whether you have a bike lane or not. But I think the fundamental point is that backing in is just plain safer. Sure, it takes some time to get used to it. The first time I went to Austin, you're like, you want me to do what? And then you do it a couple of times and you're done, and it's simple. And there is outdoor dining all up and down the street with all these back-end parking spaces.
Thank you.
Well, a few times I'm glad I'm short. David Heiser, 509 Central Avenue. Also supportive of the back-end parking idea. Like the gentleman before me, I spend a couple weeks a year in Austin on work travel. It works fantastic there. Concurrent to what he said, that doesn't seem to impede the dining. The safety advantages, whether you're a biker, whether you are a driver exiting, or I think, frankly, the number one empirical opportunities for poor safety avoidance comes when you're actually driving down and someone backs out at you. In downtown, the roadway is actually fairly narrow with the parallel parking on the north side and the diagonal pull in on the south side. And so when someone comes backing out, particularly when they've got a Sequoia class SUV that's to the west of them that impedes their ability to see, and God knows there's a lot of those in Wilmette, including my own, that backing out, your ability to swerve or to hit the brakes in downtown when that happens regularly. And so I think there's a very, very clear opportunity with that. And well, frankly, it's the threat of serious health damage is greater with a biker. I think the number one sort of potential accident avoidance will come with drivers going down. And then to comment from the representative of the chamber. If we look at the outdoor dining that's there, what's on the north side of the street, with the pizza place, with the wine cellar that's now, or the new wine place that's put out the tables there, I don't believe that's going to be impacted because that's still going to be parallel. And I think, per what you guys are limited to doing with respect to roadway widening, I don't think you can do that on the north side of the street. On the south side of the street, the only dining is Valley Lodge. And frankly, that's actually further west of where these back-end parking spaces would be. And so the impact would be from one parking space, one car, and given that their dining actually juts out to the, toward the north into that, I don't think that's a relevant argument. I also, just from a straight economic perspective, scaring away people from shopping, it doesn't feel to me plausible that the fact that you're going to have to back in is going to dissuade you from patronizing one of our downtown businesses. So again, I think the two arguments that were voiced by the chamber, in my mind, don't hold a tremendous amount of water, and the safety issues carry the day. Just got back from Tokyo last week, saw it extensively there. Seems like it works pretty well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Graham and 1032 Central Avenue. I'll make this quick. I am definitely in favor. We were recently in Denver where they use back-end parking around some of their entertainment areas. I will admit it was a little hard to back in at first. It's a little clumsy till you know what you're doing. But boy, when you leave, it's 100 times easier. You are not trying to guess what's on the other side of the SUV. And it is just 100 times safer with your visibility.
Thank you.
My name is Ray Koenig. I live in the Optima condo building at 11th and Central. For entertainment, I'm on the 4th floor. I look out the window at Central each evening and during the day. I think you need to establish some priorities on this because there's two phases regarding the parking. During the day is shopping, and that's not too much of a problem. Starting at 5 o'clock until about 9 o'clock, I didn't walk up here tonight because I just wanted to find out. I had difficulty finding a parking place. I almost went back down the home and walk up the 2 blocks because parking is at that premium. We don't want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg because right now the dining facilities is what's driving property values in this town. I say this from experience because we've sold a number of units in the Optima building at previous to 2008 prices, with people putting another $100,000 in them to remodel them. The reason given by the real estate people talking to me is it's a lively community, there's food to eat, there's banks to go to, there's this and that they can walk to. The other point I'm making is I watch people park. The quality of driving ability, even parking going in head first, would be a C-. Now, what that means is I've lived in that window for 13 years watching this panorama. I have yet to see an accident of anybody pulling out of a parking spot and hitting another car. I have not seen that in 13 years. I'd like to see a police report on that. I think one other thing that should happen is at the corner of 11th and Central, there should be some form of traffic regulation because of the amount of pedestrian traffic there. Somebody is going to get hurt someday because people do not stop for people in the crosswalks there. The other thing is people going through the traffic area generally will drop their speed to maybe 20, 25. That's during the busy hours. As soon as they get to 11th, they immediately accelerate out and move up to roughly 40, sometimes 45 miles an hour. I'm a pretty good gauge of this. I would suggest we'd have better police enforcement because we do have signs that say no U-turns. And we have U-turns constantly. I witnessed 3 tonight before I came up here at 7 o'clock. People in search of parking spots will go to 11th, make a U-turn, and quite often there's cars coming out of 11th going south and 11th going north. And the confusion there, I'm surprised we've never had an accident. Well, we did have one 2 weeks ago. Nobody got hurt, fortunately, but it's just total confusion at that corner. Now, to have people backing into a parking spot, I can't believe how that would work, really. I can't see safety. I am an educated driver. I'm a defensive driver. I'm licensed at many facilities to drive. Backing in is the last thing that I do. I go in head first each time. So all I'm saying is, the other thing might be, I spent a large time in Phoenix. They're paving down there now with rubberized asphalt. It's absolutely silent. If you're going to repave this, I would suggest somebody take a look at that and evaluate that as a possible deal, because we do get noise on the street just from tires. The buses are rather noisy, but, that's part of life. Bicycles, that's during the day, not so much at night. I see nobody on bicycles at night after, say, 6 o'clock, after 5 o'clock. School hours, that's a different story. 4th of July, another deal. You don't even want to be on the street coming up Central on 4th of July. So that's my comments.
Thank you.
Love to live here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Debbie Graham. I live at 1032 Central, corner of 11th and Central. Interesting that I'm following this gentleman because I was basically going to say some of the same things he did. That corner is crazy. It's terrible. Many, many times every day and every
So
evening.
we're gonna come back to that
corner.
question. You'll have an opportunity to speak
Perfect.
then. Let's just talk, if you want to say something about back-end parking.
No, I didn't know there was going to be
Okay,
another
nope,
opportunity.
there's more.
Hi, I'm Margaret Cartier at 731 Washington, and I think back-in parking is a brilliant idea. Every time I angle park on Wilmette Avenue by the bank, I fear for my life as I pull back out again. And while we're not talking about Wilmette Avenue, that's mostly where I pull in, but if I was doing it on Central, I'd feel much the same way, that it would be so much safer for the bikers, for me to back in where nothing is moving and to pull out looking at what is moving makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you? I'm Ryrie Pelleton. I live at 1115 Lake Avenue. And I want to say thank you very much for doing this. As far as the diagonal parking goes, I did attend the presentation at Active Transportation Head and heard what the gentleman had to say. And I would urge you, while this is wonderful that we're getting all of this anecdotal information and opinion and some emotion, that other communities, as have been pointed out, have been doing this for a while, and there's got to be data that shows whether or not this is dangerous or not. And I can't imagine that it's going to take, while it may take more time to back in, it's going to take less time to back out. than a head-in Parker would. Head-in Parker goes in easily, but has to go really slowly coming out. So the congestion argument doesn't hold much water with me personally. It looks like a wash. As far as backing onto sidewalks, that may occur, sure. Is it going to happen more often than people driving headfirst onto sidewalks? Once again, I see that as pretty much of a wash. I would advocate for this. I'm frustrated after having seen the presentation about a month or two ago when I park over by Redefined Fitness and there are signs saying don't back into the spaces because those spaces are really narrow and you can't possibly see when you're backing out of them. That's on Washington Avenue, just west of Green Bay Road. And it would be much more helpful if you were coming out and seeing where you were going. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joanne Murphy. I live at 724 12th Street. There seems to be a lot of concern with people driving their cars. I'm a resident of the village.
They're having a little trouble hearing him back. Could you lean? Yeah.
There seems to be quite a bit of concern about people who come to visit the village area and come in their cars. I actually live in the village area. I walk those streets most days on my walk to the lakefront, and I do not want to walk down the street past all that exhaust spewing all over the sidewalk. I don't think that people are going to come and visit the area with their children in strollers with that exhaust blowing in their children's faces. I really think for all the negatives above, we should really discourage that. I speak for some other people who couldn't come tonight who also, excuse me, live in the village area. And I happen to have visited some friends in Wisconsin where they just put in the reverse parking and no one likes it. It's very unpopular. It was put in their village area.
All right. Thank you. Okay. That is interesting. I guess, we have discussion now, public comment on that. Let's close that off. Discussion amongst ourselves, since we need to give Bridget some direction on this. So one question for me that popped into mind is if you do back-in parking, it is, it might be odd to not have back-in parking on Wilmette Avenue then. Would you, if you're going to do it, would you do it for all of downtown?
I would agree with that, yes, for consistency, because the challenge with this is the learning curve and getting people used to it. So I think you'd want to keep it consistent within the village center.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
So it's interesting when you get, when we ask for public comment, we recognize that we're getting public comment from people that decided to show up, right? You're all interested. You decided to show up. There's 27,000 residents in Wilmette. 26,930 of them didn't show up today. But it's interesting to understand that we have far more support, and this is not neighborhood centric. This is not centric to, if you live on the, 400 block of Central, this is irrelevant to you. This is all just people talking about being downtown. So this is really it's a different feeling than I thought, as I was thinking about how this might go tonight. What are your thinkings? Had you considered this before? I mean, had you thought about it?
No, and I think that's where I'm struggling because, I appreciate hearing from Austin. It's in Denver. It's in Asia. I haven't seen it local around here, and so are people used to it, or would that be a discouragement to say the learning curve when people come into Wilmette? It makes sense to me backing up, and the safety, I get that. I do also want to respect, especially in the business district. We didn't hear from any other than the chamber. We didn't hear from any other business operators. and how they feel, and is it a real concern? Because, similar to our conversation a month ago about at 4th and Linden, that parking is for the business district. We should look to, I want to make sure we're doing what's right by them. And then my other question would be, if we decide to go with reverse parking and it doesn't work, can we change it?
It's striping, so yes.
So,
I guess, well.
Yeah, just
Julie?
a couple of comments. They have it in Des Moines. That's kind of local.
Des Moines?
Yes, they do. And what they did is they marked it off and did a demonstration so people could try it. And it seemed like it did work okay. Just a couple quick questions for you, Bridget. Since it is just striping, one option would be, it seems like it does make sense to have all of downtown that's right next to each other the same way. So option one would be to stripe it all. Option two would be, what if we waited and striped it later? And then another question I have.
What do you mean by striped it later?
Striped
you mean after the project?
Striped it the same as Wilmette for now, but then later, if we wanted to make the change, we could.
What if we striped it now?
That's what I was going to ask.
Reverse.
What if we started before we started the
Because
project?
this project's not going to start construction for a year,
Oh, you mean
2 years?
to try it?
2 years. So stripe it reverse now. Try it for 2 years, and if it, the interesting thing is, we don't have any accident data for downtown because there aren't any accidents to record.
Well, that's
So,
a thought. Just try it, and if we
might
hate
be
it,
solving for a problem that we in fact don't have, because we're not going to get on the video. We're not going to get this nice little bike lane out of it. It's still going to be a shared.
Actually,
road.
I have a quick question about that. The road width is, let's see,
50 and a half. Here, Green Bay to 11th is 50.5.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, with road width and everything, you hear about road diets. Are we already at kind of optimal lane widths?
Yeah, we're working under the assumption that we don't want to lose even a single parking space in the village center. So.
And we can't narrow the lane widths at all?
No.
Okay, that answers that. Yeah, I think that does sound kind of interesting to, as you said, stripe it now, see what people think of it.
Well, I think we should get your
out in
opinion
some
on
spots?
stripe it now,
To consider it.
because I know it's not free to stripe.
Right.
And we have a budget for road marking that we go through every year, road paint.
I think the striping is one thing. There's also it would be very time intensive to have folks out there literally ushering people into their parking spaces over a period of time, because there's going to be so much confusion when you see cars pointing in the opposite. Because what we'd have to do is flip-flop the diagonal parking to the other side of the street. Right? Because so you could, okay, you're right. So you keep it on the same side, but you'd have to change the direction.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So we would have to talk to our police department, talk to staff, and have people out there.
It's definitely not free to do on so many levels. I mean, just, we talk about, okay, it's just paint, pull up a stripe, put down a new stripe, but it's signage, it is education, it's some level of enforcement, because somebody's going to be heading, let's say they're heading west and they're going to cross the line and pull in face in the wrong direction. We're gonna have some issues like that, but I guess the question is, do we want to try it? Do we have budget to try it? And I think trying it before we build might actually make sense, just so we don't.
Another
mess up a
thing
new
that
road.
a number of communities have had success with doing a pop-up demonstration. I know there was one at Going Green Matters. The weather was not great. Only 25 people made their way down there. But that would be another thing, if there could be an opportunity to do a pop-up demonstration somewhere where you can, I've seen it done where you get some sort of temporary tape and signs and have all kinds of people and just have a pop-up trial day or days.
What I'm hearing is the committee is interested in this, and perhaps we don't have all the answers. Staff doesn't. I'm not prepared to respond to logistically how we make it happen. But if there's interest, then we'll take it back to in discussing with
there's
our
definitely
departments.
budget impact to it, so we need to understand that, particularly if we're going to test it before you do it. So maybe you don't test it before you do it. But I guess hearing the community have such a relatively strong point of view on it, I totally respect the Chamber's point of view on it as well. I don't want to kill the, who used the term, kill the goose that lays the golden egg? I don't want to kill the goose that's laying the golden egg. I understand also that, it could potentially affect only one restaurant because all our dining is on the north side of the street except for one restaurant today. And that could change, right?
Actually, there are a couple more.
That have outdoor seating.
Yeah.
That there are others that have outdoor seating?
Mhm.
Yes. Okay. On the south side?
Yes.
Okay.
How would you do the pop-ups? How do those work?
The way they can work, you can get some sort of tape or something, and you just publicize it, designate an area, tape it in, have people come and try backing in, give out T-shirts.
I'm thinking, is there a way to do it on like a Saturday near the farmer's market when you have a group of people here? Not that I want people to work on Saturdays, but to at least get people to think about it.
Yeah, I think that's
see
what
it. I don't know.
what other communities have done, something along those lines. Yeah.
So I guess that is a totally legitimate piece, but for direction today, we probably want to think about what are the budget impacts. So we'd like to know what the budget impact would be if we moved from one to the other. So it's different signage, it's education, you got to make some estimate in education, it's different striping. What other components go into that? So what's the budget impact of that is one. And accident data. It would be interesting to know, we know what our accident data is here, but other communities have done it without, ignore that the white line on the left up there, so where it's a shared roadway with bikes. Does accident data change at all? That's the kind of thing that you can find out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because if it, for us, it's hard because you're going from 0 to maybe 0. But if, in fact, other communities said, well, we went from, minimal, however you measure that, to more, then we'd want to reconsider it. I mean, it sounds great on paper, but I don't know whether it works in reality.
I agree.
How do you feel? Is there,
I think
is there any other component we're missing besides accident money?
I think if there is interest in doing a pop-up event, putting a budget figure on that too.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's not free. If you said we're going to do it over in the Chase parking lot or in the Village Hall parking lot and mock up some parking spaces, someone's got to buy that duct tape to
That's right.
cover that over.
And is there concurrence that we would want it? Well, I guess it's a little early. We'd have to try it on Central first, see if it works, and then we would extend it to Wilmette Avenue or other areas.
That's got to be, as you think about budget, you have to think about it as all four of those, both sides of Central and both sides of Wilmette Avenue.
Okay.
'Cause
I don't know how you would not do that.
I don't know how you don't do it either.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other direction you want on that?
No, thank you.
Okay, Brian, back to you.
Okay, so we're going to stay on the topic of parking, albeit now we're moving to the residential parking consideration. So as part of our survey, we had as question number 3, on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is low and 5 is high, how do you value residential parking within the residential segment of Central Avenue? And the results you see on the right-hand side, 50% value that highly. When you take a look at those surveyed that live or work along Central, that number goes up to nearly 80%. Some additional comments that we received as part of the survey was folks wanted to see residential parking maintained throughout the corridor. They also were interested in maintaining or keeping the school staff parking adjacent or across the street from Central Elementary. But there was also a recognition or acknowledgement that on-street parking is underutilized, particularly east of 8th Street along Central Avenue. So we took a look at that ourselves, and while this seemed like a very complicated table, on the left-hand side, from a block-by-block basis, where 11th is by 11th Street and 0 is down by Sheridan, we took a tally of all the available parking spaces within the residential section. That total is 229. We then went out 4 different occasions during the week to get a sense on what the on-street parking was within the residential section. So the first was an AM period on a weekday morning. Second was midday on a weekday. Third, we looked at it from a PM condition during the week. And lastly, we looked at a midday point on the weekend. And so you see the results in the totals and the percentages at the bottom of that chart, and they are considerably low, with the exception of the block that has Central Elementary School, where you see that 69% of the available spaces are utilized in that midday period. So it's just something to consider when we're looking at the various options and alternatives in terms of what we can accommodate within our roadway section. So we're talking about Central Elementary and their drop-off operations. We received some comments related to that. Overall, the sentiment was it works well, but if there are opportunities for improvements, folks would be open to them. You can see here in the photo where there are some carriage walks that provide access to the school, but in the drop-off area, when the cars line up in the morning, those are not enough. So there was an interest in hardscaping those turfed areas that you see in the parkway to provide more opportunities for kids to get out of their cars into school. And then with any public improvement, looking for ways to promote walking, particularly within the neighborhood, so that kids could actually walk to school as opposed to having their parents need to drop them off. So we performed a video analysis or observation February morning to get an understanding of how the drop-offs operate. And what we saw here represented in this picture is listed on the slide. So we did see backups all the way to 8th Street. Cars don't generally pull all the way up. The students also remain in their cars as they wait for the school to open. And there's a limited paved area that you see there within the parkway, as you can see the kids kind of walking across as they're getting out of their cars as directly as they can. The duration of this only lasts for about 15 or 20 minutes. As soon as the school doors open, this dissipates pretty quickly. It does operate relatively efficiently, albeit with the use of staff. So whether it's teachers or administrators are out there helping direct traffic, getting the cars, pulling up as far as they can, and getting them out as soon as the students are out of the vehicles. So some adjustments that could be made. We could make improvements to the drop-off area, and the school could consider maybe opening its doors sooner, which would then alleviate the problem of having kids waiting in their cars while other cars are trying to perform these drop-offs. Our recommendation as part of these improvements would be to add that hardscape, and it could be some type of paving. It doesn't necessarily have to be concrete, so that we can eliminate the condition that you see there where people are walking on the turf, which in inclement weather can be muddy or covered with snow. And so this is something that we would recommend as part of the overall project. So now we're going to shift our focus a little bit as it relates to parking and biking. And so question number 5 in our survey was whether or not you're in favor of losing some on-street parking to improve biking options. And you can see on the left-hand side, there was about 50% that agree, strongly disagree, or disagree of losing on-street parking to improve biking. And when you take a look at those along Central Avenue, that number or that percentage ticks up to 72%.
So could you back up to that slide?
Sure.
As I add up those two bars, they don't look like they add to 72% to me. What am I missing?
Okay, so before I put that animation up with that second number, right now there were 95 respondents.
Okay.
And so this is the tally of all 95 respondents.
Okay.
And so that is about 50% are in this disagree or strongly disagree category. We also took a look at where those respondents were from. And so out of the 95, there were 29 that were from the corridor. That live on Central, essentially. Okay. And so of those respondents, 21 of those 29, or 72% then, in this grouping, oppose changing parking for biking considerations.
Okay.
So that's what this represents. So that 29 is part of the overall 95, but they're specifically the ones that identified themselves as being along Central.
Because if you take that grouping out of it, and I understand why you put that grouping in there, because they're the actual residents that would be affected by it, it's about a 50-50 split on...
Correct.
Correct. That. Okay.
We also then had the question related to how frequently people bike on Central Avenue. So question 11 is on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is not at all, and 5 is most of the time. How much do you bike along Central Avenue? So 50% of all the respondents, so not just those along Central, all the respondents either never or rarely bike along Central Avenue. Some additional comments that we saw related to biking and bike accommodations, that bike lanes would promote more biking along the Central corridor. There was also the opinion expressed that cyclists should be using Greenleaf. That's what's identified on the bike map. It provides a wider cross-section, has less traffic. So that was a comment that was brought up. Generally speaking, people feel more comfortable riding in the residential area as opposed to in the downtown area, where downtown is unsafe for some of the parking issues that have already been described. There were also comments about enforcing or prohibiting riding on sidewalks in the downtown. Also comments related to adding more bike racks in downtown and throughout the corridor. And these next photos kind of represent the need for additional bike racks throughout the corridor. So here you see one in the downtown area where a bike is chained to a tree. Here's one just off 11th that you see a bike tied to a signpost. And then even in downtown, and you can tell by the adjacent trees, this is kind of in an off-season, the bike racks are pretty utilized within the metro station. So a recommendation for this project and the improvements would be to add bike racks where appropriate throughout the corridor. The next topic we're going to cover is related to speed, or I'm sorry, I should say safety. First area we'll cover is related to speed. So the question was asked whether or not speeding is a problem along Central Avenue. And so 68 respondents all believe that's the case. So the village conducted a speed study back in February just to get an idea of the severity of speeding within the corridor. And you can see here the results in the 4 segments that were tested from the block between 11th and 10th, where the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. The average speed for eastbound traffic was 28 miles an hour, and the average for westbound was 23. From 9th to 8th Street, where the speed limit is increased to 30, the average eastbound was 33 miles an hour, with the average westbound at 31. Blocks from 5th to 4th, where the posted speed is continues at 30 miles an hour. The average eastbound is 30, with westbound average at 29. And then from 4th to 3rd, which also has a posted speed of 30, eastbound average was 31, with westbound average of 24. Now, irrespective of the speed study, as part of this project, there's an opportunity to improve safety as well. And one way to do that is shown here, illustrated here with curb extensions. We have an opportunity as part of this project to mitigate traffic flow and speed, but we also can look to mitigate or improve safety within the corridor. So this is an example where adding curb extensions to the side streets is an opportunity to do that. It protects parking. It provides shorter crosswalks that you see illustrated here in the picture, which improves safety for pedestrians. And it provides opportunities, as you see in that far right corner, for additional green space and landscaping. So as part of this project, the recommendation would be to add curb extensions at all side streets that would have on-street parking. Some additional safety comments that we saw or that we heard are as follows. The stop sign at 4th Street is regularly ignored. There's an interest in adding a new 4-way stop at 11th, where we see stop signs or the stop for pedestrian signs not obeyed. It's been brought up already about U-turns being a problem throughout the corridor. And then here, this photo just identifies where the placement of utilities, and in this case an electric box, can compromise the safety for pedestrians along the sidewalks. So another mitigation measure that we can bring to this project as it relates to speed control would be speed tables. The positives is that it does slow traffic, it does provide added protection for pedestrians, and it creates an awareness of the driver that they're in a residential setting. This is something.
Can you describe what a speed table is?
It's that they're actually at the intersections. It's like a raised intersection.
Okay.
So you take the crosswalk and elevate it a little bit, raises the pedestrian, slows traffic. It's not as harsh as a speed hump, though. It's much more mild.
So the recommendation contingent on funding would be to provide, as described, a raised intersection condition at 11th, and then a speed table just east of 8th Street. So the comment that was related to adding a stop sign at 11th and Central, as it relates to safety, there can be a number of factors that are being considered here. One is illustrated in this diagram that you see in front of you, where the sight lines for cars trying to get access from 11th to Central is currently pretty difficult. And that has more to do, or as much to do with the placement of the stop bars along 11th as anything. There's also the issue then where you have adjacent trees and landscaping in the residential lots right next to the intersection that can really block that view for motorists trying to access Central. So this leads to dangerous crossing conditions that have been described. So this diagram illustrates how by moving those stop bars closer to Central, that you improve your sight lines, which gives you the ability to see further, whether east or west on Central Avenue, which gives you more opportunity to pull out in a safer fashion. So these two photos really represent that scenario. The first at the top, describing that existing condition. You can see there, if you're looking to the left, how the bushes and the trees really compromise your view. Whereas if you were to pull that stop bar a little closer to the intersection, you get a much clearer picture and viewpoint of Central, allowing you for a much safer condition.
Brian, could you also mention we did a MUTCD warrant analysis for an all-way stop at 11th?
Yeah, so As was mentioned earlier, we have to follow the federal guidelines and procedures, and in this case, here at this intersection, based on the traffic volumes, a four-way stop sign is not warranted. We're going to shift focus a little bit on aesthetics, and so first starting with the downtown, there's a tremendous opportunity here for this community to enhance your downtown by adding streetscape elements. And you can see here is a great photo of what you have available to you. So some of those options you see here listed include, which some is coming sooner than later. Hanging baskets are going to be coming to the downtown. That's something that the village has already approved, and it will be incorporating this season. So that's good news in terms of aesthetics. As part of this project, we will be incorporating decorative traffic signals here at the intersection of Wilmette and Central. And then additional streetscape and landscape elements can certainly be incorporated into the downtown, all subject to funding. And those include brick paver accents, planters, trees, and then furnishings such as bike racks, which we've already talked about, benches, and litter and recycling receptacles. These are all things that can greatly enhance your downtown. Some other aesthetic comments that we heard were related to the adjacent side streets, particularly the ones that are brick paved, and the desire to keep those as brick paved. So as we talk about making improvements to Central, the limits of our project will not impact these brick side streets. Another resource that the community has, of course, is the historic lighting that's already in place throughout the community, and the great interest from many about the attractiveness and aesthetics of these fixtures. So we will maintain these light fixtures throughout the corridor. We may spruce them up a bit in terms of adding a fresh coat of paint. Sorry about that. And there was a comment that there may be an opportunity to add wayfinding signage, and these light poles might be a good opportunity to do that. As you see here, where we identify a church, we could have signage on either side of the corridor directing folks to the downtown. Now, as we're talking about signing, though, we also need to consider whether or not we have an opportunity here to limit our regulatory signage along the corridor and reduce the redundancy that we see. This light pole, as we just described as being an aesthetic feature, isn't so aesthetic when it's covered by signs. So we'll look at opportunities to consolidate and take away some of that redundancy. If there's ways that we can get signs on actual sign posts as opposed to the light posts, we'll look to do that as well. But our recommendation is that we can probably reduce the regulatory signs throughout the corridor and take away some of that, so we call it sign pollution. So we'll shift gears again and look at the topics of stormwater and green infrastructure. Some of the comments that we heard was that there was a desire to incorporate these improvements wherever it's appropriate. Comment about reducing flooding within the area or the corridor, and that leaves sometimes block the inlets, as you see here, during the season where leaves get raked into the street as opposed to in the parkway. If landscaping is going to be added, try to find or identify plantings that are low maintenance. And then there's the consideration for permeable pavements, which we'll talk about here in a second. So in terms of green infrastructure, there might be an opportunity throughout the corridor to incorporate bioswales, or at the very least add native plantings throughout. Now, we do understand that the corridor is characterized by its tree-lined nature, and we don't have a lot of opportunities for these open spaces, but we talked about extending the curb line, and so there's those extension areas that might provide some of that. We also do have some isolated areas throughout the corridor, and working with individual residents, we may be able to identify opportunities where they would be interested in adding these features within their parkway. So it is something that we will investigate. From a stormwater perspective, separating the combined sewer is being evaluated, along with providing new storm sewer as relates to both the condition of the existing systems, but then also the costs to replace or improve them. From a green infrastructure perspective, if a new storm sewer were to be incorporated, we could include what you see there, those special catch basins or drains that allow infiltration into the ground, which helps alleviate some of the flooding issues that were reported or commented on. Permeable pavements are something that could be utilized within the corridor. It promotes infiltration like we just talked about. It also can improve water quality and quantity throughout. Some of the downfalls or negatives is that it is challenging if it's implemented as you see here in a parking lane. If biking was also in this area, that's not as nice of a surface as on pavement. Plowing and maintenance is a consideration, and then the cost for permeable pavements is higher than a regular pavement would be. So decision point number 2 tonight is related to incorporating these elements, whether it's the bioswales and native plantings, permeable pavements, whether that's in a large-scale area such as your downtown or in a limited area as you see here within the parking lanes. That was consideration that we were looking for direction tonight. So we can do that now, or we can continue and address it at the end.
I think we should do this now.
Okay.
And I think we should be very, very focused, because we're only this is only a discussion of a couple of things. I mean, some of these were, kind of obvious, not obvious, but things that I know will be incorporated into the project. If we need more bike racks, we'll get more bike racks, assuming there's budget there for it. I don't think some of those are for debate. It's these that will impact residents and the downtown area that we really should talk about. So this isn't the discussion of parking on the north or south side of the street and things like this. This is the discussion of anybody have a point of view on bioswales, and there's very limited area to put those in. Does anybody have a point of view on permeable pavers? So permeable pavers are similar to brick streets, but they're not brick streets. They may look like bricks, but they're not our traditional brick. They are pavers that are designed to let water through, and they require some sort of infrastructure below to do something with that water. Typically, you might find them where there is parking versus in the roadway. So as you think about downtown, there's parking on the north and south side of the street. The question might be, is that appropriate use of funds to put permeable pavers there? And as there's parking further to the east, where do we want to think about permeable pavers? So that's kind of the decision points you're looking for on those. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So anybody in the audience have a point of view on those very narrowly focused questions?
I would like to ask.
Come on up. Speaking to the mic so everybody can hear you. And
Sure. Yeah, Marty Bariff at 1035 Central, and I would just like to respectfully add some more discussion about 11th and Central intersection, but I will comment on a few other of the points that you allowed. The 11th and Central intersection, which I see quite a bit. I'm around our home probably 3 of the 5 work days, and during the weekend, I myself was a victim of an accident in my automobile in that intersection, and I think the statistics may not be showing the reality. I often cross the intersection to go to the train from our home at 1035, and cars just whiz right past on Central, pay no attention to that at all. And I know that one of the 2 upright signs that say pedestrian crossing has not been there for about 2 years, but nonetheless, I don't know that that has made a significant difference. But I think that probably there are other members of the community, whether they live at 4th Street and walk to the train or 10th Street and walk to the train, would see that that is a dangerous intersection. I'd also like to talk about the U-turns, is that, yes, there are many people that illegally make U-turns, but what even is more concern to me, when they attempt to make the U-turn, they can't do it all the way. So it happens if a car is going east on Central, they're trying to look for a parking space for a store or restaurant, they try to make the U-turn, they can only do that maybe 270 degrees, then they back up into Central, and that's even a greater danger in that setting. So I know that there are issues about line of sight, things of that nature, but I would just like to indicate my opinion that I think a 4-way stop sign really is a necessary improvement for safety for cars and pedestrians in that area, despite the statistics on the federal regulations that sometimes you have to do what's right, irrespective of what the guidelines indicate. I don't know that anyone is going to file suit. You know, maybe someone would, but I doubt it in that sense. Just another point about biking in general on Central. As a resident there, I worry about the mixture of the commercial traffic, the buses, and bikes, even if we had lanes, because I see that, say, in other areas, and I think that that increases risk. So I just wanted to make those 2 points, and one about the intersection, which I have very strong opinion, obviously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could address your comments about 11th and Central. You and I could have lunch and talk about stop signs for a long time. I have a lot of conversations with residents about stop signs. The perception is that they make intersections safer. And the data, the real-world studies out there actually are counter to that. And the reason that is where there's not enough traffic, in this case, there's not enough volume of cars on 11th Street, so that when cars travel on Central, if 9 times out of 10, they know that there's not anybody coming in the opposite direction for them to stop for, they're going to very quickly learn that and roll through those stop signs. And it's actually to the pedestrians' disadvantage, because there's a false sense of security that cars are going to stop when, in fact, a lot of times they don't. So we're very, very careful, and in fact, we don't put up stop signs where they're not warranted based on those volumes. And so to address the safety issue, which we're also very concerned about, there are other tools in the toolbox to do that. And I think what would work really well on this particular area is what's called a raised intersection. So we're already going to close it in by taking the stop bars and moving them in, so your crossing distance is going to be closer. And then we're going to raise the whole intersection up. We can build it out of brick pavers, so it's a visual cue to the driver that they're approaching something different and they should slow down. It draws attention to the intersection, which will help the pedestrian navigate. So I think those changes will be more effective even than just putting in a stop sign.
Okay, well, I'm certainly open to anything that seems workable, and I appreciate your observations. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, and that is that you say the negative on the permeable pavers is the cost, but is over 20 years, is it more expensive, or is it just the initial cost?
Well, don't get permeable pavers confused with brick streets, because brick streets over the long run, are cheaper.
Right, I understand.
But these are more expensive initially, and they require ongoing maintenance. So we have several green alleys that we have tested in the village.
Yes.
They're very effective, but they require maintenance every year. They require special cleaning of them to continue to allow them to run optimally. It's easy enough in an alley where it's one pass or 2 passes down an alley. In a parking situation, it becomes a little more complicated for us from a maintenance perspective, because you've got to do it off hours when there aren't cars parked there, and they're not necessarily linear as far as access for the vehicles to maintain them.
Okay.
Was that right?
Steve Graham from 1032 Central. whatever the solution is on 11th and Central, there are a lot of three-point turns and U-turns there, so you've heard that enough. My question's about something I thought I saw on the screen, I may be wrong, is when you're talking about the 11th and Central intersection, it looked like maybe you would extend on the northwest side the grass out a little bit so there'd be a shorter crosswalk. It was one of your slides. And if so, it looked like along Central between 11th and 10th, if I was looking at it correctly, there was some angle parking added?
No.
Or I can move to the side and just look through there real quick and let somebody else have a...
Brian, why don't you back up and point to that, see if you can point to that slide.
I could've
Steve,
looked at it
hang
reversed.
hang up here and see if
No, I think it was slide 35.
Go
I saw what
back
I
one.
know what you're looking at. 'cause
The
that-
angled spot.
Yeah.
This slide?
Yeah.
And then the next one.
Yeah.
So when you, this is existing in the downtown when you're looking to the west.
Okay.
So it's not anything new.
I feel better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was right.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay.
Hi, Kelly Gruner, 610 Central. So I have a question about parking, which I know doesn't relate to this, but we got all this great information about all these different things happening on Central, and we're only talking about these very small things.
parking's next.
Parking's next.
Oh, yeah.
So I got to come back?
We saved the big, no,
No.
it's right after this.
No, I mean, like, come back, like,
Yes,
stand in line.
yes, Kelly, you
my
get to visit us
my
again.
other real quick thing, I'll give my 2 cents on drop-off at Central. If you just put up signs and said, no parking from 8:30 to 9:15 on the north side of the street, cars could flow through, because people can park all through there, but in the afternoon you can't. So that would be a very quick, easy solution.
You got that?
Got it.
So, but I'll be back for parking.
All right. It's gonna be a good one.
Hello, Jeff Axelrod, 631 Central. The bioswale is a great idea. We would sign up for it. My wife and I didn't see the survey. We and our kids bike all the time on Central. We would totally be for replacing parking with bike lanes. So you can add us to the 29 or whatever people. And then related, the permeable pavements if it would make biking more difficult, I wouldn't be a fan of that. So if you could leave a little bit of a space for bikes, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is John Bowman. I'm at 321 Washington. I just wanted to also comment on the bioswales. I hadn't heard a lot on that. I do like the idea. I'd expand that to the rest of the village where we can. More landscaping, nicer parkways, I think would be a nice thing to see. For the permeable pavers, that to me would be a cost issue, and if there is a significant flooding in the area. If flooding's not a real issue, then it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. I would not put it where there's biking, but Central is not a biking corridor, so that's not an issue. Permeable pavers underneath parking lanes seems to make a lot of sense if it would alleviate flooding or some problem that's out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Debbie Graham at 1032 Central. So I still want to clarify the proposal about 11th and Central. We're talking about extending the four corners out some to shorten the crosswalk. Is that the idea?
Yes, so if you look back at the So in this case here, we just put our focus on moving the stop bar closer to the intersection, which helps with the sight lines. But as we talked about, the other improvements related to extending the curb, which you see here, the idea, as illustrated in that right corner, would be to have that curb area come out, and it would come out on all four corners then, which then, this is a representation of an improved condition. This is already in place. And so this would be
right.
carried forward to the other intersections that currently don't have
Okay.
these curb extensions.
So the only thing go ahead.
A great example of this is Wilmette Avenue and Prairie.
And
So as you drive down Wilmette Avenue, pass Millens, and begin to head out to Ridge, we've done this on several intersections to bump them in, because as you constrict traffic flow, people naturally drive slower. And so the idea is to make that narrower for
So
traffic.
the only thing I wanted to remark on, depending on how you do that, so we live on the northeast corner right there, and frequently cars cannot go both directions on 11th because there's cars that are parked there, there are delivery trucks, there's whatever. So just make sure that you don't narrow that distance from one side to the other, because it's already very difficult and cars are frequently at a standstill.
The intersection, most certainly you would be able to pass two cars next to each other. We don't plan on doing anything north or south of the intersection on 11th. I know what you're talking about, particularly north. That's where I happen to drive on 11th. It's a narrow street.
It's a narrow
And you have
street.
parking on one side. You've got a drop off for the Optima building, et cetera, on the other side. In some places, it's a challenge, but we don't expect to change any of that.
This would be limited to the intersection location, so it wouldn't be carried through the segment of the roadway.
But you
And-
also don't want to narrow the intersection itself.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You asked about comments on biking and bioswales. I bike a lot.
Can I get your name? Sorry.
Ron Meyer, 8th and Greenleaf. I bike a lot, and if you're biking in Wilmette, you just have to be really, really careful. Biking on Greenleaf is definitely smarter than biking on Central. When you bike on Central, you're automatically in the traffic lanes. As soon as there's one car on a block that's parked there, you can't really be biking where people park, because you're always pulling out, and you pull out into traffic ahead so that the person who might be behind you, you look over your left shoulder, and you have to start to pull out early to make it clear. So the concern about permeable pavement making it harder on a biker, that's not really that's not a real concern, because when you're biking, what I'm saying is you don't bike. If it's 4 lanes, you're biking in the center 2 lanes. You have to, because you don't want to have somebody open a car door and hit you, so you have to be out in the, okay. Second thing is, like I say, you just have to be very, very careful when you're biking in downtown Wilmette, no matter where you go. Panera, Poplar, Greenleaf, very popular area, very dangerous. I have to go through there all the time. You just have to be careful. So, that's just part of it. If someone's going to bike, they have to be careful. As far as the pavers and the swales, Kenilworth spent a lot of time last year putting bioswales in what I would call their east-west streets, the one that run into the lake north of Kenilworth Avenue, if anybody wants to see it. Very interesting, very involved. The benefit from bioswales and permeable, I think, is mostly to the MWRD, right? Because it decreases their peak input, and it decreases, their problems of having to dump stuff into the lake. I think that's the main benefit. There's not a lot of flooding on Central, and even if there were, I don't think that bioswales or permeable would mitigate it. So I like the idea of both of those things, because I'm a big MWRD fan, but I don't think we should do those unless we get significant grants. And my understanding is, like that beautiful permeable alley that you did near Laurel and 8th Street, gorgeous, but my understanding is that you got a grant for that. So I would say, go with it, but only if you get financial support. Just because of what you mentioned with the ongoing maintenance and the initial cost.
Thank you. Okay, I think that concludes public comment. You want to go back to that slide that has the decision point? Oh, you've gotten high-tech here. All right, so you're looking for a couple of recommendations from us on this, on bioswales and permeable pavement. Discussion?
And just to clarify, we don't need to be very specific, other than if you like the idea, we'll incorporate them when we get into the design where it's possible.
I think actually Bridget answered it. I like the design. It's worth exploring. Design it out, and then we'll see how much it costs.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of that too. And I know Public Works and Engineering is always on the lookout for grant opportunities, and it could be that there would be some associated with this. One thing we did discuss recently, Ron, you were talking about the permeable alleys, the green alleys. There's been an overwhelmingly positive response, and we would like to pursue that, and we're looking into some ways to get some funding assistance for that too. So yeah, I'd be in favor of pursuing all of that.
So kind of my point of view on bioswales is, they're nice. They make us feel better. I don't think that we have the real estate to do major league bioswales like the piece you mentioned, Ron, north of Kenilworth Avenue, where those parkways were taken down a couple of feet and the curb cuts to drain into them. We would lose a lot of trees doing that. I don't think residents are ready for that. Right. Did they lose a lot of trees when they did that in Kenilworth, or were there no trees in their parkway?
They preserved a lot of trees. Who knows how the trees will do, but I went along there and looked at it, and a lot of them are between trees. They had some,
some big old trees there.
Big old trees and some spaces between them.
I just don't see how we have the real estate to do anything wholesale there unless there's some piece of land that you're thinking of that.
Now, the parkways are nice and wide, and we've talked for some time about what do we want our parkways to look like? Do we just like grass, or do we want to add some native plants and some interest to the parkways? And bioswales is one way to do that. And you're right, we can't do widespread bioswales, but there may be pockets to do them. And, I think we also have to work with the residents. They have to like the way they look, and they'll probably have to help us maintain, weed them, and so forth too. So.
Well, I think the committee, is open to hearing about ideas and where those would work, and if there's grant money available for them. But I definitely think the residents have to weigh in on.
Right.
If you said, your parkway is going to become a bioswale, you're going to have there's got to be a lot of public comment on that.
Sure.
As far as permeable pavers go, I totally understand the bikes don't want to ride on those. If we had the ability to do permeable pavers, and that's a big if because that's just an expensive proposition altogether, would it encourage people to not ride their bike on Central and go down to Greenleaf, which is a better spot for biking?
This discussion actually works really well with what the roadway configuration is going to look like, because next we're going to talk about, is there parking or is there not parking, and how do bikes fit into that? So we may want to hold off on that, because once we decide what the roadway configuration is going to be, then we can look at where the parking exists and if this is an option anymore.
Okay, fair enough. I like the idea of permeable pavers, again, if budget allows it, in the downtown area where parking is. So you've got diagonal parking and parallel parking. If those were permeable pavers, that would be, a really interesting aesthetic consideration there. And I don't know what community I was in, but I've seen some community where that's done. And it looks good. And I look at it more from a aesthetic perspective than the absorption of water, though, permeable surfaces in downtown Wilmette are pretty limited, so there might be a good opportunity to get some of that downtown water to stay downtown.
I like it.
Agree.
Yeah, I agree. Sounds good.
Okay. Is that enough?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Now we're coming into the sprint session here on our third decision point. So this is all about parking.
This is about
complex discussion.
Ultimate roadway configuration, so the geometry. And we're going to present to you 3 different options tonight.
Okay.
So first, as with anything, it's important to talk about the existing conditions. We're looking at the overall roadway geometry, and we have to look at it from two perspectives here within this corridor. We have the downtown area, which you see highlighted in orange, and we have the residential area highlighted in blue. Next, I want to represent where we have parking available. So the blue lines there up and down the corridor represent parallel parking that exists today. So you can see a gap in front of Central Elementary School, and you also see a gap on the north side of Central between 4th and Sheridan Road. We talked about that earlier. That's related to the narrow width of the pavement, which doesn't allow for parking on the north side of the street. We also have diagonal parking, which you see indicated there. There's 52 spaces on the south side of Central within the downtown area. And as I mentioned, these are the areas that parking is not allowed today. So looking at those totals again, we represented this earlier in a table. When you look at the downtown area highlighted in orange, your pavement width is just over 50 feet. There's 74 existing spaces within the downtown, which includes both those angled parking spaces we talked about, but then also some parallel spots on the north side of Central. There are no bike lanes within the downtown. Then as you move into the residential section, between 11th and 8th, pavement width 38 feet. You see the parking numbers there. There's no bike lanes within the residential section as well. So your totals from an existing perspective is there are 303 on-street parking spaces, some angled, some parallel. You see the numbers there. So as we mentioned, we looked at it from three different options. First option is really a match existing, where we essentially put back what's there today with one lane of traffic in each direction and parallel parking provided on both sides of the street. So in this scenario, no parking is lost throughout the corridor. This would be a typical section where we have the parallel parking, and this obviously does not represent the downtown. We're looking specifically with these three options within the residential section. It's important for me to note that we are not changing the configuration of the downtown block or the downtown segment. The second option that we looked at would be to incorporate dedicated separate bike lanes. So you see those identified or highlighted there with the arrows. They would be included on both the north and south side of the roadway. Parking would still be provided along the south side of the street between 11th and 8th Street. But parking would need to be restricted in the areas you see hatched out on the south side between 8th and 4th, and then also on the south side between 4th and Sheridan, and then the north side from 11th all the way to Sheridan. In this configuration, we would see a parking loss of 180 spaces, which represents about 60% of the entire parking stock. It is not something that we would recommend. Here's what it could look like. If we look at it from the perspective of 11th to 8th Street, this cross-section illustrates one travel lane in each direction, the separate bike lanes on the north and south side, and maintaining the parallel parking on the south side of the street within that segment. From 8th to Sheridan, this perspective shows the impacts of losing parking on both the north and the south side of the street, but does include then a separate bike lane within the cross-section. The third option that we looked at is what's known as a shared bike lane configuration. So bike accommodations would be provided on both the north and south side of Central from 11th to Sheridan Road. The parallel parking would be maintained on the south side of the street from 11th to 4th. And parking would need to be restricted on the south side of Central from 4th to Sheridan, and then along the north side of Central from 11th to Sheridan. This results in a parking loss of 125 spaces, which represents 40% of the overall parking numbers. And as we indicated earlier, we did see some available parking capacity in the residential area, so we identified that within this segment here between 11th and 4th Street. This is how that scenario would look. You can see the difference in terms of the bike accommodations. Instead of having a separate striped out lane, the bikes are accommodated within the travel lane with a wider travel lane provided for both cars and bikes. You can also see the pavement markings indicated there as well. From 11th to 4th Street, we would lose parking on the north side, but we would be able to maintain parallel parking on the south side. This is the perspective for 4th to Sheridan, which indicates the shared lane with parking lots on the south side. This is a section where we have a really narrow configuration. It's down to 28 feet here. So 14-foot shared lanes are provided for this configuration. So looking at this strictly from a parking perspective, we've already kind of run down the existing totals. That's what you see here within the downtown and also within the residential section. With option number 1, there would be 0 lost parking. The same configuration would be constructed and the same parking would be maintained. In option number 2, we would need to eliminate 180 spaces, approximately 60% of the overall parking within the corridor. And then for option 3, which is the shared lane scenario, we would lose 125 spaces, which represents 40% of the total parking volume along the corridor. There are additional factors that should take into account when you're looking at roadway geometry. We've listed some of them here, and how they match up or compare to one another. So the first factor you can look at is whether or not it meets the parking needs. You can see the considerations there for the 3 options. Whether it accommodates biking, maintains the existing configuration. The option has the opportunity to provide traffic calming. And then lastly, any maintenance considerations for the 3 options. So you see how they compare or are balanced to one another.
Why is maintenance higher for option 2 and 3?
More striping.
More striping, okay.
So this takes us very quickly to our decision point number 3 as it relates to the roadway configuration. Yes?
And option 3, the meets parking needs is yellow. Is that going back to your slide 19 just on these numbers? Is that why? How do you get that yellow?
It's in comparison to option 1. So where you're...
But I guess and maybe I'm looking at the analysis on that residential parking capacity, it looked like the max was 55, but is that too limited of a sample? So maybe I'm...
Are you looking at slide 19?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we lose whatever on option 3, 125 spaces, we still would have enough spaces to meet the needs for what you sampled here, if I understand it. And I might not be looking at it the correct way.
Based on the data that we took on the given time periods that we took it, that would be correct.
Is that too limited of a scope?
Yes,
okay.
That's just a snapshot, right?
It's a snapshot, but it's an interesting one. I highlighted that too, is that if you eliminate the midday one, where you're heavily parked on the 8, 9, and 1000 block, really 8 and 9, that's school.
That's central.
Yeah, that's,
Or
that's
central school.
school parking. The residential parking, the residential parking is, I acknowledge this is a small sample, but even if we're off by a lot, there's a lot of parking.
Right.
I don't know that residents have to look for parking. Wait, we'll get there.
Well, then I go back to I think where you were going, on slide 22.
Yep.
Of the 95 sample, that seemed 50-50 were.
You said page 22?
Or slide 22, the parking versus biking. It says 22 on mine.
Yep.
50-50 of the 95 people sampled were okay giving up parking.
Yeah.
But that's why we broke out the Central Ave, the people who live there, because they're most impacted by the parking loss.
And that's
72% don't want to lose parking.
on the 800, 900 block.
No, on this slide 22.
Yeah.
That is all. So they had 95 respondents, but then they narrowed it down to just the ones that lived on Central.
Was it all the way on Central, or I thought the 95 was everybody on Central?
No, the 95 was the total respondents that we had as part of the survey, which was available to the entire community.
Okay.
So then
all right, then I was wrong. I thought it was 95 just of the people on Central, and that 72% was in that 3 blocks. Got it.
No.
So I could have taken it even though I don't live on Central.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. That's why I didn't take it.
That's good of you. Okay. Any other questions before we open this up for public comment? Trustees? Bridget?
No.
Okay. So we need a recommendation at decision point 3 on roadway geometry. And we have 3 options. Doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't other options or tweaks that we shouldn't be talking about, but I think that engineering is looking for, kind of direction on where to go here. So let's open this up for public.
Excuse me,
sure.
can I ask one quick question before we get into this? If there were a bike lane, what happens to the bikes when they get to 11th? Say they're westbound?
They'd have to share the road.
Share the road or find a way. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'm Ron Meyer, 8th and Greenleaf. I love to bike, but I really think going out of your way to accommodate a bike lane on Central is something you don't have to worry about. For one thing, you did a lot of work on geometry, but you ignored behavior. During biking season, you've got your landscapers. These guys park anywhere. They don't care if there's a no parking sign. They are going to park on Central. The minute there's somebody parked in that block, like I said before, when you're biking, you have to go out into the traffic lane anyway. You can't just pop out around the person who's parked there. And these landscape guys, I'm on Sheridan and Highland Park. They just park wherever they want. It doesn't matter if it's marked no parking. So just assume that people are going to park regardless of the signs. Like the other behavioral thing is if you've got a bike, you can go a block or 2 or 3 or 4 out of your way. That's why you're on a bike, to get exercise. So if I were you, I would consider just saying the bikers are, put them on Greenleaf. Greenleaf has many nice things about it. Not only is the street wide, but the distance between the houses and the house across the street is wide, so there's a whole lot more space for everybody to see. The only problem for people biking on Greenleaf is that it's been since 1993 that's been adequately repaved, and it's a terrible rough surface. That's a separate issue. But I really think that this concern about bikes on Central, just not a good idea. And like you said, the minute they get in downtown, they're going to have to compete with the traffic anyway. So just, you go to downtown Evanston, and they've got an eastbound bike lane on one street. They've got a westbound bike lane a couple blocks south, Davis and Church. If you're on a bike, you can go out of your way, and that's what I would. It'll make things a whole lot easier if you don't worry about bike lanes on Central.
Thank you.
Kelly Gruner, 610 Central, back again. Okay, my first thing, I like option 1. I live on Central. I definitely don't want our parking taken away. I live on the north side. Couple things with the data. You cannot park on Central from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. So unless you've left your house and come home and parked, you're not parking on Central. So the data at 6 a.m., most people have not gotten their car and reparked their car on the front street. Same with at night. When I come home at night, when I know I'm not going to use the car again, I'm not back out parking at 6:30 and saying, oh, wait, I got to move my car. Once I'm in, I'm parking in the back. So even though I know there's not a ton of people that park on Central, the hours that it's been taken is not the appropriate hours of when people really park because we're limited. Plus, I think between 4th and 5th, there is restrictive parking, 2-hour parking between like 8 and 10, or there's limited parking due to being close to the L. So that factors into how many people are actually parking on the street during those times. I have small children, so parking on the south side of the street and getting out of my car and having to cross the street or go to the crosswalk is a huge pain in the butt, basically. And it totally brings down our home value. When people look at our home, they're saying, wait, I can't park in front of our house. I have to only use my garage. No service people like lawn people, visitors, anybody can come access your house because they have to park on the side streets where it's available. Biking. I do not, sitting on my front porch, biking is minimal on Central. And as a parent of small kids, even if there was a bike lane, I would never say, yeah, let's go bike on Central, just like Sheridan Road. You have trucks, fast cars, buses. If you're not a confident cyclist or biker, you don't use the bike lane on Sheridan. Most people illegally are on the sidewalks. So I don't see a value in adding a bike lane to Central because people just won't use it.
Thank you.
Those are all my points.
Hello, Jeff Axelrod, 631. I like option number 2. We have actually, I think I emailed the village about the shared lanes on Sheridan because they kind of terrify me. I don't think cars typically give bikes the distance that they need, that they might if there were a solid white line like with the shared lane or with the dedicated lane. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh.
Marty Barrett again at
can I-
1035 Central.
Hang on just a second.
Sure.
I think the prior resident said you'd liked option 2, but that's dedicated lanes just like Sheridan. So I just want to make sure.
I think.
Do you like the shared lanes?
Sheridan in Wilmette, I think, doesn't have dedicated lanes. I think they have the shared lane, like.
Nope.
It's an actual dedicated
you know
lane.
what it is? I take that back. Is it once you go north into Kenilworth that it's a shared lane, right?
You can experience every type
I think what I did was
bike lane if you go north. You can experience every type.
Yeah, so
shared, narrow, ones with drains right in the middle of it.
I
It's
think
really
what I did was
an
I
adventure.
emailed the village and asked if they could work with the neighboring communities to get a dedicated bike lane all up Sheridan. So anyway, sorry for my mistake. Thanks.
Marty Barrett again at 1035 Central. I just wanted to really repeat myself, my concern about having bike lanes on Central where you've got buses and commercial traffic. And I think, the bike lane can't be restricted to people that are above 18 or 21 years of age. You're going to have all kinds of individuals there, some with brains that are more mature, some that are more risk-taking. And I think what's missing in this analysis is safety. I don't see any data that talks about accidents with bike lanes on heavily commercial streets. And I think that is a big missing factor, that we can't just look at numbers of cars, which deals with convenience for individuals that come to the area or the residents, but I think the safety factor is just missing, and I think that's a big mistake to make any decision without knowing what the safety ramifications are.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dennis Allen, first-time speaker. I live at 4th and Central. I would like to reiterate what the first 2 speakers said. This is Wilmette. It's not Chicago. It's not even Evanston. It's a pretty sleepy little town. We really don't need parking lanes. And one of the speakers mentioned, friends, or family friends, and service vehicles. There's no place else to park, and it's needed. I'm a retiree. I'm home all day long. Those parking spaces, they're jumping all day long. Again, service vehicles and visitors. So I just don't see the need for it. And finally, my only opportunity, whoever decided to put in Christmas lights year-round at downtown Wilmette, brilliant idea. It looks great. You got a mess on your hands with downtown Wilmette. You got a lot of work to do. But from 11th down to Sheridan Road, I think there's a lot to be said for the status quo. Spend your money wisely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Susan Barton here, 618 Fifth Street. Again, I'm just saying I like option 2. I want to keep the children safe in our community. We would love, and I am actually a Park District employee, to help train the children in 2nd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade bike safety. I would love to teach them a safe way to get from Central to High Crest to the junior high without a bike lane, and to teach them to go on the sidewalk through the business district is restricted right now. If we teach them to go to Greenleaf, the village has no long-term plan. How do we want this village to connect, I guess? So here we've got this great opportunity on Central. It's fabulous. I'm excited about it. I'm so happy to have you guys here and to listen to all of our opinions. I think it's great. But we need to think about how do we connect, again, like these Park District facilities, the rec center, the Centennial, pool, tennis center to the beach. How do we get these kids from one place to another? And this is a great opportunity that we will miss out if we go with option 1. Option 1 is nothing. It's just basically repaving and giving us what we have now. Option 2 gives us a futuristic thinking for what our Earth should be like in the future and what will actually improve our real estate values and home values. And option 3, shared lanes are great, but again, it's like a car versus a bike. And I would rather have a protected area for children to ride. And I guess I would really love to have a bike plan so that we can, a map that is updated, so we can actually show children this is how you get here to there. And I've actually ridden with groups of kids to show them where and how to go from east to west. But a lot of people don't do that. So if you actually update the very outdated bike plan, that'd be a great step. But I think if we go with option 1, we're doing nothing but just redoing what we have now. And I think we also need to think about, everyone talks about parking and the lack of parking and their cars and what am I going to do with my cars and how will people come to my house to deliver services. You'll find a way. It'll be fine. But we actually need to think about safety. Safety first for our children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Julie Adrianopoli. I'm at 711 Central Avenue, and actually I'm in the process of purchasing another house that is also on Central. So I am an avid biker. My family, we all bike. We do triathlons. We are runners. We use the streets of Wilmette often for activity. I feel like there are, first, I feel like the data that was presented in terms of the parking on Central is flawed data. As was mentioned before, it is on Tuesday and Wednesday. It is during the fall when there is not as many landscaping individuals, when there are not as many people using Central to park and walk to the beach as they would in the summer. And also, if you're only looking at a few days, I know Mondays in front of our house are extremely busy, as are Friday, because of landscaping and other services. So I think the limited sampling does not give you a full perspective of the parking usage, as well as the time frame that was selected, as was mentioned by a fellow neighbor. I am all for safety, and again, as I mentioned, all for creating more opportunities for families to bike in our city. But it seems that there are better alternatives, including Greenleaf, which has been mentioned, which is a wider street. So I would propose that there be a perhaps broader, more creative thinking that goes into this decision. And also, Central is already, the residents who are living on Central already kind of bear the burden of busing and the buses using Central. And for us to have to also give up parking, I think will affect our property values. And so I think there are better alternatives that should be considered, and my recommendation would be option one. We do not have major issues right now. We do not have major issues with flooding. My guess is you're not getting major requests for the biking path on Central specifically. So why change it if it's not broken? There's better use of our taxpayer dollars.
Great, thank you very much.
Hi, Chuck Ryder again. I live at 830 Central, which is the corner of 9th and Central across from the school. I would suggest that your data could be more complete in the 9th and Central area. So you have a parking count at 12:15 in the afternoon in the 8 and 900 blocks. Later in the afternoon, it's not legal to park on the street in those two blocks. So what you know at 12:15 doesn't answer what you know at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Second, I'm not sure that I ride 1,000 miles a year, and I have for 20 years. So I'm an avid cyclist, and I think bike lanes are great. I think it is completely impractical in front of my house. If you've spent time sitting on my front lawn in the morning or the afternoon, in the 24 years I've lived on the corner, the number of kids who walk to school has gone to near zero, and the number who are driven has gone to near 100%. It's phenomenal. It's not safe to be on your bike out when people are on their way to school or on their way from school, because every driver is focused on the mission of getting Johnny to school or from school. And I've almost been run over on my own street on 9th Street by possessed parents trying to get that kid to school. The thought of a bike lane down Central and the congestion at 8th and 9th and toward 10th is really profound. It's hard for me to imagine how you could engineer that away. So I'd encourage more study of the Central School area. And I frankly think bike lanes are the answer to a question that people aren't asking. The one thing that will make a huge difference to bike safety is the current repaving, which fixed the paving next to the curb where people park, has created a new lane of traffic in front of my house. So if I'm riding my bike where I think I should be safe, where the other speaker was talking about sort of weaving around the parked cars, there are now people going 40 miles an hour next to the curb because the pavement is so smooth. So we've sort of inadvertently created a new problem. But I'm opposed to bike lanes as an avid cyclist because I just don't think it's practical in front of Central School.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, Ken O'Bell from 221 Linden. I thought the comment was interesting because, and I think a lot of people, they identify an issue, but I think they draw exactly the wrong conclusion. I mean, I think when to observe that kids aren't walking to school and kids aren't biking to school, and there's so much traffic in front of Central School, exactly. And this is the new thinking that's needed. If we have so much traffic congestion, the questions we have to be asking are, how can we reduce traffic congestion? How can we make the streets more friendly for pedestrians and bikers? And yes, also educate people and encourage them. But, unless you build it, people won't come. So to say, well, there's no great demand for bike accommodations, well, that's because you don't have conditions that are conducive to doing a lot of biking. So I think I absolutely agree with Susan or whoever the speaker was that said, the status quo, it's just repaving, basically. I mean, we'll get some nicer little accommodations, but this is an opportunity. We've talked about other opportunities in the village, and we always run up against the challenge of funding. Here we've got $3+ million of federal funding. So somebody mentioned the use of money. Well, I mean, we are spending federal dollars, so, I mean, we should spend them well. I'm not suggesting that we waste them, but this is a great funding opportunity to make a real impact. And I think we should be pushing in the direction, as was said, of the future. I think we should be pushing in the direction of what all of the other communities around us are doing. Now, if I just want to address a few other points that I heard. In terms of Greenleaf, I have to respectfully disagree with you, Trustee, that we should be pushing people off Central and onto Greenleaf. I think we have to be taking the opportunity, since this is the street that we have funding for, this is the street that connects to our downtown, this is the street that connects to Sheridan, this is the street that can get people to the Park District at Gilson. We don't want to discourage people from being on Central. We want to encourage kids to be on Central and ride to school. We want to encourage people who bike on Sheridan Road to give them some wayfinding signage, get them up Central into our downtown. They go to other places where the community makes it known that there are opportunities. We've got some good restaurants and cafes in town. So we don't want to push people onto Greenleaf. Greenleaf does not connect on the east side to anything, and transportation infrastructure is all about connectivity. On the west side, Greenleaf is highly problematic because then you run into Poplar, you run very close to the tracks, you run into a very dangerous intersection for cars and bikes coming around Poplar to, I guess it's Wilmette Avenue at that point. So, and Greenleaf is in terrible shape, and I mean, who knows when that's going to be done. So the reality is Central is going to be the beautifully paved road. So unless Greenleaf is going to get done anytime soon, people are going to be riding on Central. So I mean, I think it's just the reality, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's something that should be encouraged. And then just finally about residents and parking. I mean, look, I live on Linden, which is a very busy street, 221. I can't park in front of my house on Linden. You can't park, at least in my neck of the woods, on the south side of Linden, not for the whole time I've lived there. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's a road width issue. Who cares? I've got a driveway. I've got a garage. I've got an alley. I've got parking right across the street. When service people come to my house, they park across the street. When guests come to my house, they park across the street. Look, if you ever ask anybody, do you want to lose something, the answer will always be no. If we always ask in this village the people who live right near any change of any kind whatsoever, do you want that change, the answer will always be no. So, I mean, I'm respectful as a resident that people care about their immediate vicinity, but this is an improvement that's being funded for the entire village. And those facts couldn't be more clear about the parking. I don't care what time of day, other than right near the school. I walk my dog on Central and 4th, 5th, 6th. There's never more than 2 cars within eyeshot. So survey it any time of day or night. Get the aggregate data that people want.
Do it again.
Parking. So if you take 40% off, you're still left with plenty of parking. Parking is simply not an issue on Central Street. So I would encourage at this point, if we're still in the consideration phase, options 2 and 3, neither of them should be taken off the table. I would say to the engineers, the phrasing, it's all about loss.
Can you step up to the mic?
Sorry. Don't be careful how you phrase things and how you present things. Don't talk about loss all the time, or at least talk about what's being gained. Show people a picture of what the beautiful streetscape looks like with the bioswales, with the bike lanes. I mean, this is the same old conversation every time we talk about an improvement in this village, and it's always the status quo, and we don't want to change, and we don't want to lose. Let's be realistic. You have to paint the vision for people because they only know the status quo. They don't know what the vision looks like. And none of the great infrastructure that you see, I just came back from New York, they've shut down traffic lanes on half of Times Square. And you want to talk about pedestrian traffic and car traffic, and it's beautiful. And bike lanes all over the place, and in Chicago. And if you ask people, well, should we lose this or that? They would say, no, let's not lose this or that.
So I get the feeling that I understand what you're saying. You want to wrap it up?
I'm wrapping it up.
All right.
Please don't rule anything out now. Let's see what these options look like, and then let's decide later. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Jennifer Giller. I live at 715 Central. I have 3 young kids, all who enjoy riding their bicycles. I'm all for safety. I'm all for visions for the future, but I'm also for acknowledging realities and what exists right now. And the fact is that the majority of us living on Central don't have a driveway. We don't have the luxury of saying, you know what, street parking's no big deal, just pull into my driveway. We have service vehicles in and out all day long, not just landscaping during the summer, but service vehicles for our HVAC, for our plumbing, and frankly, people that come to our house. And when we start to lose, when we don't have access in front of our side street, then all of a sudden the north-south access streets become congested. And it concerns me that we're looking at the potential to have people come to do work in our house that may need the proximity of parking in front of our house, that don't have that we're going to have guests that come that may have to park blocks away because all of a sudden these short north-south streets are being congested with cars. So I don't want to I don't want to lose sight of the realities of what people on Central need. And I also agree very profoundly that the parking study is so flawed in terms of the times that it was conducted. So I just really want to strongly encourage that to the people on Central, losing parking isn't just because we hate change. It's because we know the realities of living on Central. And I would have grave concerns for what it means for our property values if there's no parking and we've now created a congested parking issue in an area where it doesn't exist right now. Thanks.
Thank you.
I will be very short.
Thank you.
Ann Nagel, 1139 Manor. I just want to bring up and remind everyone that we do have a complete streets policy in Wilmette. So that says that when there is a road reconstruction, we have to evaluate people of all walks, walking, biking, disabilities. So to say, I'd feel ashamed if we would say, well, let's just move it to another street, and that's our answer. This is an opportunity to put all of those amenities in one street. And I think if we build it, they will come. People will come off Sheridan, come to our downtown, come to our brew pub, come to our restaurants, come to events. They'll come, and it's the straight shot that gets you there. It takes you to the beach. People could, if we got divvies eventually, people could get off the train and go down to the bike or down to the lake and experience the lake or the bird habitat or other things. So this is a great opportunity. And again, we do have that policy, and this is a great opportunity to try to use it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I too promise to be brief. Option 2, I think, is not feasible. It doesn't gel with reality. Full lanes going both ways isn't there. I do think that.
Where do you live? Can you just give your name and address?
Sorry, I gave it to you earlier. Dave Heiser, 509 Central.
Got it.
I think option 2 it's problematic. It takes away too much of what's going on. But I do think there's a chance that you can thread the needle with option 3, and you can get to shared lane. Yes, it will mean some loss of parking on the north side of the street. I agree with Julie and with Jennifer and others who've made the statement that the parking survey is flawed. Please, by the way, get rid of the 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. ban. It drives us nuts, and the cops still ticket us even if we call. So almost every time. So that's an absurdity that I don't understand. But I think it's worth taking a long look at option number 3 and trying to figure out what exactly that would look like. Redo the parking study, do it over a longer period of time, multiple seasons, and look at it from the standpoint of perhaps a different set of times a day.
Actually, address up here, because we'll end up telling them what to do.
So anyway, the last thing, nobody made a comment on the bioswales the last time around, during the last comment period. I think where you're talking about putting in, where you're going to constrict the roadway, I think you talked about doing that at 11th. You already
At the intersections, yes.
Right, at the intersections, right? That's a place where you do have an opportunity because you don't have mature trees there, you don't have any trees at all. And I think it would create some nice, visual points that would help with traffic calming and other things. So thanks for your time.
Sir, if you're interested in the reversal of the 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. parking ban, there's a process to do that. It requires a petition, and you can give me a call or shoot me an email. I'll walk you through it.
Great, thank you.
Good evening. Don Steffen, 719 Central for the last 43 years. My concern isn't bioswales and options 1 through 3. My concern is that Central Street is simply not big enough to accommodate physically all that you're talking about. you're talking about residential traffic, you're talking about commercial traffic, you're talking about bus traffic, school traffic, and bike traffic. That's an awful lot of activity on a finite width of that street. I'm old enough to remember when a railroad ran from 4th Street to Poplar on Greenleaf, which I believe is right now a dedicated bike route to get to the east side of the village. At least there are signs that indicate bike path pointing east, right at the corner of Poplar and Greenleaf, I believe. Why can't the engineering firm come up with a study that shows using alternative east-west streets to do all that you're trying to cram into Central Street? Bridget and I have spoken about the desire to have a path into the lakefront park. Well, Lake Street can accommodate that. You already have bike traffic on Greenleaf. The buses are my greatest concern. My car was parked in front of my house a year and a half ago, and an eastbound truck lost control when a westbound bus apparently spooked the driver. He ran into my car. Thank God nobody was in it. Thank God there were no bicycles going eastbound at the time, and it ruined my car. I think that one of the things that your commission, and I don't know if it's this particular committee, the buses are virtually empty from right after rush hour until after school. Why those big pace buses have to continue down Central Street, why they cannot move to smaller vans during the non-rush hours is beyond me. The buses are empty, they pollute, they're noisy. I think your biggest problem is that bus traffic, and maybe you should consider moving that over to Greenleaf or put the bikes over on Greenleaf. You cannot cram everything into Central Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think that concludes public comment. Trustees, Bridget is looking for direction, discussion.
Well,
Well, this isn't simple, is it? Yeah, I appreciate everyone's input. And, you know, it seems like there isn't any real, I'm not hearing any absolute consensus one way or the other. It just seems to me that there are, and this is something we are working on addressing in other committees, but it seems like there are needs of little kids biking that are different from adults because little kids need more protection. They're getting to school or to the parks or whatever. Based on what people said and the way it looks, it seems to me that option 3 has some potential. Because I do agree with several of the people who commented that if we're going to do this, this is the chance to make some changes in a positive way. You know, looking at other communities, there have been some amazing new developments in what I call urban planning and transportation planning, and I think we can do something that's innovative here. I don't think we have a completely definite answer tonight, but I'm leaning toward exploring something along the lines of option 3.
I would agree, but I also think you're going to need more information on the parking.
Yes, I agree
if that
with
really
that.
is,
yeah.
Because and I don't want to think that. I don't think you were tasked to do a traffic study. I think you just did a random sample. So I appreciate actually just limited. I don't think that was in your scope anyway. So we would need to do more to see what the real impact is on the parking and the neighbors. And I think I heard mix of residents on Central because they're going to be most impacted. And it seemed like there were some that said keep it the same. I also do, some of what I'm going to say are the professional cyclists. Once we get a paved road in there, they're going to use that no matter what. Whether there's a lane there or not, they're going to gravitate there. So I for sure think option 2 is a no-go.
Yeah,
so
option 2 was a no-go for me.
Right. So if there's some accommodation, I would look.
So I kind of feel the same way. I think we've kind of beaten the parking study to death. Maybe we do need to do more research on parking. I will say that I have lived on streets that have had parking on one side and not on the other, and I have been on the side that doesn't have parking, and everybody made it work. I'm not talking about is there enough parking. I'm saying if parking is across the street from you, you make it work. And, you might not get to park your car right in front of you. We had little kids when we went through that. And as you look around our village, Bridget, you probably know exactly, but I'm guessing that a lot of our residential streets are parking on only one side. And people can handle it. And it's not a safety issue normally. Not saying it's not a safety issue here in Central. And it's less convenient than having parking right in front of your street, but it's not the end of the world. So if the parking numbers supported it and said there's enough parking to actually, pull this off, I'm okay with it. I'm okay also with mixing buses with bikes and everything else. And all my kids bike to Central School, 4 kids, all of them went through there. I don't think that we're discouraging people from biking. If you go look at the bike racks on the part of the season where the older kid or younger kids are now allowed to ride their bikes, you can't park your bike there. They're pushing each other's bikes out of the way. They're locking their bikes to their friends' bikes because there's not enough space for that. And I still think people safely bike to Central all the time. I think for me it comes down to what behavior do we want to incent. And I do care about getting the bikes in the right place. And so for me, is Central the right place? Is there some other street? We've talked over the years about Forest. We've talked about Lake. We've talked about Central. We've talked about Greenleaf. And none of them are ideal. Every single one of them has a problem. When we were talking about repaving Forest, we said let's put in a dedicated bike lane on Forest and lose parking on one side of Forest. We talked about Lake. Is there a way to restripe Lake and make Lake work? Lake's too busy. For me, that's the worst option. Forest is a much narrower street, and my non-scientific study says it's much more heavily parked. I don't know why, but that's just my feeling. And we're getting, that's going to be brick before we know it. So that, for me, it's Central. Central's ideal because it connects to the school, connects to downtown. Everybody has to take their life in their hands when they're biking from 11th to Green Bay because there's simply no real estate. So I think completely about the residential part of it. I think that, we shouldn't eliminate option 3. I think we should eliminate option 2.
Yeah.
That makes it easier to cross that one out.
That's too many parkings.
You got to look at the parking study again. We got to spend more time and money getting that parking study right, and then have a discussion. Does option 3 versus 1 work? Because this is a seminal moment. We either get it right here, or we wait till we repave Greenleaf, whenever that's going to be. Someone said we don't know when that's going to be. Bridget knows everything. She can say it's going to be 5 years from now or 15 years from now.
And you have the money.
She knows. Any other discussion?
Is that what you wanted to hear?
It's you wanted us to choose 1 or 2 or 3, right?
No, I understand the concern with the parking study, and we can absolutely collect more data. So when this comes back to the committee, it won't be this committee anymore. It'll be a different committee. I guess the one thing on my mind, we sent out 900 notices to the neighbors asking to come to the meeting and learn about it. Perhaps if we did another mailing, even specific to the Central Avenue residents, asking for specific comments on option 3. Would you like us to do that to try and gather more information, or?
I think you're better off spending the money on the parking study. I agree. Spend the money there. I think Mr. Obel is right when he said nobody likes to have anything taken away. Right. So option 3 is going to be an unpopular decision for anybody on the north side of Central. Emotionally speaking, it's just, you're going to get a polarized response. I don't think you learn anything new from that. You got to make a tough decision.
Okay.
Could I just
you do, everybody's gonna.
I would just encourage you to consider doing a safety analysis too. If there's an SUV and a bike and a bus and another car coming the other direction, is that safe?
Okay, so I suffice to say, the engineering for the road and the safety in the road is a well understood bit of engineering, and we didn't construct a super narrow lane, for example, to make room for a bike and have parking. So the safety aspect of it is, the engineering aspect of the safety is just a function of nationwide known data on how roads operate. We know how roads operate around schools. There's nothing unique about Central School versus, XYZ school in Southern California. So, we understand how those work, and the safety pieces of it are built in. Now, I don't think we ignore safety. People today have said you need to think safety. And we know, for example, as we think about the little stub street from 4th to Sheridan, that's too narrow. So we know something about safety to say that's too narrow to have parking on both sides of the street. You have to do sharrows and shared lane, for example, to accommodate bikes on there. So I think some of those are built in. I don't know what more you would think about safety. We can look up all the accident data because the village keeps great accident data. But you're not going to find much accident data on Central Avenue. It's a relatively safe street. It's not totally safe, but it's relative to everything else. There's no outliers on Central.
How soon can we do a traffic study? Because you're going to want to do it during the school year.
We can do it right away, and there really isn't a budget.
It's a parking
study.
Parking, right, sorry.
Yeah, there would be no budget impact. Our staff can do this with the parking enforcement. So,
No, great.
Yeah.
and bring it back to the committee.
Before May 9th?
May 8th, right? Or is May 9th the actual last day?
I'd be, I'm game for trying if you can get it done. I'd happily have this committee work on it since we've got the continuity
You have to
of it.
give notice, though, for this?
Yeah.
Notice
30
only
days.
72 hours.
Oh, is that all
like
it is? Oh. Sorry.
Yeah,
My
hardest
other committee
thing is
slapped my
finding
hand.
time
'cause
waking
I-
up.
Right, the hardest part is finding when
notice.
you're in town.
Me?
Yeah, no, okay. Okay, good. You got what you need?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Back to our agenda. Is there any old business?
There's none.
Any new business?
None.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. The meeting is
Aye.
adjourned. Thank you.
Then maybe you were. Did you skip public comment?
We've had.
Total info. Weather. Total info. Sports.